So good morning and welcome to the March 2025 session of the Daring to Learn webinar series. My name is Alaina Boyd. If you guys have been on Daring to Learn with us before, you usually see me moderating these sessions. I'm actually going to be sharing with you guys this morning, talking about some basic principles of layout and design for social media content creation. So if any of you are brand new to Daring to Learn, this is a monthly webinar series hosted through the UT Center for Profitable Agriculture. Our topics change each month, our speakers rotate, and all of these sessions are recorded and then posted to the center's YouTube channel. If you are a Tennessee producer and you're not aware of this already, participating in Daring to Learn can earn you some TAEP credit. That's for the Tennessee Agricultural Enhancement Program. So there will be a survey link and a QR code at the end of this session that we'll share with you guys. That way you can give feedback and record your attendance. You do need to watch a total of 5 of these Daring to Learn sessions and then turn in those evaluation forms in order to receive that TAEP credit. Just one more housekeeping thing, then we'll go ahead and kick off into our slides. You guys will be able to ask questions in the chat box or kind of raise your hand throughout the Zoom. If you've got a question that needs to be asked at any time, that maybe it'd be easier to ask that out loud instead of typing that in the chat box, I can turn your audio on. So feel free to ask anytime as we kind of get started here. Just really briefly, a little bit about me, as I've already mentioned. My name is Alaina Boyd. I am an extension assistant in the Center for Profitable Agriculture. I kind of focus in value-added agriculture marketing. So for those of you not familiar with CPA, CPA is a formal partnership between UT Extension and Tennessee Farm Bureau, and we kind of exist as a resource and work to provide technical assistance to farmers and producers interested in value-added agriculture. I specifically am part of CPA's value-added dairy team. So if any of you are dairy producers, you probably see me or we've interacted in some way in the past. And I work really closely with the Southeast Dairy Business Innovation Initiative folks. So like I mentioned earlier, I normally moderate these sessions, but I'm going to be presenting today to you guys. So just a little quick disclaimer as we move through. Everything in this presentation is strictly for informational purposes. Any specific program that we mention or any kind of platform that we talk about, this is all just strictly for educational purposes and not an endorsement in any way. And just diving into sort of an overview of everything that we're going to touch on this morning in this session. We'll answer the question of what is design, then we'll move into discussing some basic design principles, and lastly, I'll share some helpful things that I think you guys should know. So one of the first things that I wanted to discuss with you guys before we move strictly into the layout and design concepts, I want to talk with you about the idea behind the attention economy. So I imagine a lot of you, probably all of you, are social media users, and likely at some point in time you have probably felt like this picture up on the screen. That's understandable. Social media changes all the time. There's a lot that goes into that. It can be overwhelming. So as we kind of think about this idea of the attention economy, I want you to think about how much content we have to sift through on social media and how busy we are in our daily lives. There was an article that came out in 2016 that I kind of touch on every so often when I'm talking about social media, that this article talked about how, as a business, all the things you put out on social media had to compete with three things. And those three things were Kim, Kanye, and cat videos. So again, you can imagine um, all the stuff we have to move through as consumers, and our consumers who are looking kind of at our brand or our business's content have to get through to get to our posts. So this whole idea behind the attention economy is that our time and our attention is limited. And for businesses, you have to compete with other businesses and other brands on social media to win that customer's attention. So this goes for social media, online shopping, really anything kind of in that digital space. So kind of in a nutshell, our time is limited, and time is really money when it comes to social media. This next slide gives a little bit of kind of a graphical representation of how that attention economy concept works. This is not necessarily an official formula by any means, but just kind of gives us a chance to see this maybe in a little bit more detail. So you can see how that user or that customer's attention multiplied by how much time they're spending on social media consuming your content or your advertisements, ideally or in theory, results in some kind of dollar amount per user. Um, so that's a little bit more of an in-depth idea behind that attention economy. All right, so we've kind of got the idea of how that attention economy works in the back of our mind. So now I kind of want you to think about how much time the average consumer spends on social media or online every day. Again, think about all that noise, all those other posts or stuff that you kind of have to sift through before you get to the post or the page that you're looking for. So you can see this graphic shows that the average American spends about 494 minutes consuming digital media every day, specifically 125 minutes with social media. Now, this graphic is a couple years old, so those numbers may have kind of changed, but you kind of get the general idea. Um, Knowing that your social media content that you post for your farm business or for your brand, that it has to cut through all that other noise on social media. How important do you think it is for your social media content to be visually appearing or visually appealing with clear kind of messaging? Um, Obviously, you kind of start to understand that it's pretty important to get that message across. So again, this graphic just kind of um, reiterates some of the things we talked about and showcases just how much time you really have to get that message across. So your social media content for your brand or your business is on the clock. You can see this graphic is from 2022. So again, it's a couple years old. But this shows that the average attention span of a human at that time was 8 seconds compared to in 2000. So around 25 years ago was 12 seconds. That's 4 seconds of attention span that we've lost. And to kind of put things into perspective, the average attention span of a goldfish is only 9 seconds. So um, the average attention span for humans is getting shorter, and you already know that you've got a limited amount of time to compete on social media with other posts or other brands to get your message across. So just kind of think about that as we move forward talking about some of these other concepts. Okay, so we've laid some pretty good groundwork with the attention economy and some of those conceptual things. So just to kind of move into talking about design specifically, why does good design matter? Well, we already know our time's limited. We know that you have to compete with other businesses in that limited amount of time. So um, good design can really make or break your social media presence or your digital presence when it comes to um, social media marketing. So from a design perspective, good design really matters because you're more likely to capture your audience's attention. You can get your message across clearly and consistently. And good design is also, it's just visually pleasing. And that encourages a positive emotional response from your audience. We'll talk a little bit more about that in these next couple of slides. But again, we're just kind of laying the groundwork for some of the more in-depth things we'll talk about later. Okay, so we've touched on why design matters. So now we really want to answer what is design. So this screenshot I've got up here on the screen comes from the International Council of Design, and they describe design as both a noun and as a verb. So design in their definition really refers to both the physical print media or the digital designs um, that designers create. So this could be graphic design, digital art, flyers, print media, really anything falls into kind of that design space. Um, and it's also interesting to note that professional artists, designers, engineers, architects, even architecture and engineering can kind of fall into that design space. But for our purposes today, we're just going to be talking about design in the sense of graphic design, more specifically for like social media images and flyers. All right. And this next slide kind of touches on layout. So you may have heard the terms design and layout may be used interchangeably before. Those are kind of two different things. So when we're talking about layout today, we're actually referring to the literal process of laying out your design elements like colors or shape or texture on the page or in your digital design. So before we had graphic design software or iPads or drawing tablets or things like that, um, layout for print media was literally where you were laying out the designs on the canvas or on the page or whatever you were working with. And layout kind of in the digital sense is not necessarily so literal, but you're still going to be laying out some of these elements we'll talk about later in your design. All right. So for this next slide, we're going to be kind of taking a look at an example and touching on sort of maybe good versus bad design. So taking a look here at this image on the screen, and I know it kind of feels like these are rhetorical questions because I'm talking and uh, you guys aren't necessarily answering, but think kind of in your head, is this hard to read? Do the colors on this image sort of look like they go together? So um, ideally, the answer for this is going to be no, and yes, that it is kind of hard to read. The design concept is pretty cool. It reminds you sort of those 3D images or something you'd look at with a pair of 3D glasses. But for the purposes of maybe effective marketing, um, this is not necessarily the most viewer-friendly image. Now, what about this one? Hopefully, when you take a look at this slide here, you can immediately see this design is much more legible. The words are much easier to read. There's still some shadows here in the background, but you can kind of see the point of this image is to see that they want you to read creators of great websites. So where before it was the same message, it was kind of hard to see. This one is much more straightforward, it's legible. Um, It's pretty visually appealing, at least to me. I know it's not as hard on the eyes as maybe the last slide that we looked at. So kind of keep these two things in mind also as we move forward. Maybe a bad example versus a little bit of a better example of design in general. So the next thing that I want to touch on with you guys is this concept of visual hierarchy. And I know I'm using a lot of graphics here, a lot of screenshots to kind of tell this story. So bear with me, guys, but taking kind of a look at this image on the screen, um, what do you notice first? Um, so hopefully you would see these big letters here at the top. So and then you maybe you would kind of move down after you see that. Um, this graphic is a really kind of clever example of visual hierarchy at work. So when you first take a look at this, your eyes would kind of follow the text across the page because this is the biggest thing here on this image. You would see this first and then sort of maybe read the next line. And actually, if you pay really close attention to this graphic, you'll kind of see it tells you what you're going to read. So maybe you'd hop from here and then this, and then you might go back over here. So anyway, um, this is sort of a clever, fun way to showcase visual hierarchy, which is actually the kind of um, purposeful arrangement of elements in a design or on a page. So whether text, symbols, um, those kind of things, you arrange those in sort of an order of importance. Um, and you establish a hierarchy in a sense that um, what you want your audience or your viewers to see first is pretty clear. So in order of importance, you'd kind of start with this since it's the biggest. These two sections here are highlighted in blue, so you'd probably move to that first, and then you'd kind of follow the hierarchy on the page. And we'll talk a little bit about how our brains work and how our eyes work in later slides. Our brains are pretty smart. They're pretty good at picking up patterns and sort of reading into these visual hierarchies without having to do too much effort. So, but that's the concept of visual hierarchy. And this example here is a really nice Instagram example of visual hierarchy sort of in the wild. So I pulled this from UT Knoxville's Instagram. This is a Tennessee Athletics post from fall of 2023. And hopefully the very first thing you notice would be this 3.40 GPA. I highlighted things here. Just to be sure that we touched on them, but hopefully your eyes would sort of naturally land on that 3.40 GPA on this Instagram image. And that's because this is the most important thing that Tennessee Athletics wanted to get across to you with this image. So in this particular semester, this was the best academic semester in Tennessee Athletics history. Not sure if that still stands. From fall 2023 to now or not, but this was what they wanted to put the most visual emphasis on. And then of course you move down here where it kind of tells you, okay, this is the best academic semester in history. And then they give even more context down here on the bottom. So hopefully your eyes would start here and then move down, and then you'd read this sentence, and maybe eventually you'd come back up here to the top to read fall 2023, or maybe you'd take a look at the power tees, but you kind of get the idea of the visual hierarchy at work in this post. So kind of with that in mind, I want to touch now on the concept of eye tracking. So visual hierarchy goes hand in hand with what researchers and marketers call eye tracking. And these eye tracking patterns refer to the way that our eyes will move across a screen or an image when we're consuming content. So you can see we've got two different patterns here, this F pattern and a Z pattern over here on the right. So F patterns are really common for text-heavy designs or images. I really like this graphic from the Interaction Design Foundation because it shows you maybe you've got a picture here, then another picture here, and text, so that in this F pattern example, our eyes would move left to right, and then finally we would scan down, because there's a lot of stuff in this example on this page. Looks like it's supposed to be a web page for us to kind of read through. And on the right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see this Z pattern. So Z patterns are for what we call less dense designs. They've got less visual elements or less stuff to kind of sift through when you're taking a look at maybe a page or a design like this. So these examples are obviously supposed to be web pages, but the concepts are still going to be the same for designs. And I've got an example here of a Z pattern eye tracking. This is a screenshot from Facebook, actually from the center's Facebook page. So you can see when we land on this page, hopefully you'd start over here in the top left, we'd move across and then come down and then back over to the right again. So I marked kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 of hopefully where you would follow this Z pattern if you're taking a look at this page. And the next one is a eye tracking for Instagram. So this is sort of an F pattern example. Maybe not the best example in the world, but the screenshots from Instagram on a desktop computer, and you can see we'd start sort of here at the top of the page and go from left to right. And there's another sort of layer here of information or things to look at. So we'd make another sweep across left to right. And then finally, when we get ready to scroll, we would move from top to bottom in this this third tracking here. So that would make our F shape. That's just sort of maybe another example. All right. So we've talked quite a bit about visual hierarchy already. We know what visual hierarchy is. But for this slide, I want to sort of introduce different ways that you can increase the visual hierarchy in your designs. So you can increase visual hierarchy by changing or considering anything from size to color, contrast, alignment. This alignment we'll talk a little bit more about in further slides. That just refers to where things are aligned on your page. And then also by changing or thinking about patterns like repetition, proximity, that's going to refer to how close things are to one another. Negative or white space, we'll talk quite a bit about how to use space in our designs here in a couple slides. And then texture. So when we're talking about texture in kind of digital media or in graphic design, we're talking about sort of patterns across a design. Since there's not physical texture to touch, we're going to be meaning more kind of patterns like a checkerboard or polka dots, that kind of thing. All right. So kind of continuing to keep that visual hierarchy in mind and some of the other design things that we've talked about. I next want to introduce to you the concept of what's called Gestalt psychology or Gestalt design principles. So Gestalt is German for unified whole. There were some German psychologists in the 1920s who created these Gestalt principles. And Gestalt psychology just refers to how we kind of look at visual elements and sort of the human experience with different design concepts. So this idea behind Gestalt psychology is that the mind, our mind informs our eyes by picking up on or taking a look at um, individual elements or patterns in a whole. So you can see some examples of visual design principles would be things like size, color, contrast. A lot of some of the things we mentioned in visual hierarchy already, those would all fall under those principles of design. So you can see from the last slide, there were several design principles. We're not going to talk about all of those in this slide set. One of the most important ones that I wanted to touch on, or that I feel is most important, is this idea of pragnans. And I'm not German, so I may be butchering how you say that. But this kind of idea behind pragnans is the human tendency to simplify complexity. So really all that means is that, as I mentioned earlier, our brains are really, really good at picking up on patterns and identifying individual pieces in a whole. So the example for this that the Interaction Design Foundation gives is the idea of these Olympic rings. So we know when we see the Olympics logo or any kind of design like this, we know these rings are interconnected and they're all supposed to be one kind of design or image together. Well, our brains are really smart. We also know that these are just 5 circles or 5 rings interconnected. So this idea behind pragnans is that we can see the whole image, but our brain can also pick apart the different pieces or the pattern in that design. Another really important design principle that we will talk quite a bit about is space. So when I'm talking about space here, I don't mean outer space. I'm talking about the literal space in between elements in your design or on a page. So space is what holds your design together. Space impacts the way that our brains see a design. It influences how readable it is, how legible it is. Some designs can even lean into using space to create optical illusions, like the FedEx logo, and we'll look at that here in this next slide. There are positive and negative space, and we'll talk about those also over the next couple of slides. Positive space is going to kind of be your focus of the design, and that negative space, also called white space, is going to be any space around that object or that image. So this is a paragraph kind of showcasing maybe a title and then a paragraph, but the concept is going to be the same, even though this is more words. All right, so I've mentioned the FedEx logo already. This is a really good example of positive and negative space at work. I don't know if you maybe have noticed before, the space in between the E and the X in the FedEx logo make an arrow. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I always think that's really interesting. I like to point that out to folks. So in this example, our positive space would be obviously the logo, and then our negative or our white space is going to be all the rest of this area around the logo. All right. So we've talked about positive and negative space, specifically now talking about negative or white space. There are what we call both micro and macro white space. So macro white space is going to refer to the space between the larger elements in a design. And again, this is kind of more text-based, but you kind of get the idea. The concept is still the same there. So macro white space is all of the space between your larger design elements, and then our micro white space would be all of the space in between the smaller design elements. So in between each word or in between each sentence, even the space between the details button and the heart button in this sense, that's going to be our micro white space. So a really good example of using space in a design, again, I pulled this from Tennessee Athletics on social media. This is their Facebook page. Um, I'm going to use a lot of Tennessee Orange examples. I don't get paid more to do that. um, but I think we all like Big Orange around here. So I've got a lot of Tennessee examples in these slides. So you can see the way that they have arranged the t-shirts in the top part of this image. And this might be kind of hard to see because the boundary for this, what's image and what's Facebook post, is kind of the top around the orange here and then goes all the way down. So this white space where there's words down here, this is all the image. But you can see they've spaced out the t-shirts. That looks really nice and crisp. And then they've got the words, Go Big Orange, the Power T. They've got some more information down here in the bottom of this image. So things are not cluttered. It looks really nice. You can tell exactly what the purpose behind this post was. In this instance, Tennessee beat Alabama. So they were running this as kind of a promo for the shirts and for the win. So this is another, just a good example of space in a design in the wild. And then we've got what we refer to as active versus passive space. So active white space is any space that you are going to add intentionally to kind of put focus on a specific portion of the design. So in this instance, all this space, and it's black in this example, but just to show that the negative or the white space around this circle here is intentional because they want that focus to be up on the circle in the top. And then we've got passive white space. So our passive white or passive negative space in a design is any space that occurs naturally or organically. And this is just to make sure that things are not crushed up on top of each other, that things are spaced in such a way that we can read it, it's legible, and you can kind of understand what we're taking a look at. Really quickly, this is a good example of active versus passive space. Again, from an Instagram image, I pulled this from the Adobe Creative Cloud Instagram, so you can see they want this guy's face to sort of be the focus of this image. It is a post about him. They've intentionally put this space around his picture, and down here on the bottom, they've kind of got his name. So you can very clearly see they want this to be the most important piece, and then you sort of move down. Um, and this is another good example too of visual hierarchy and space kind of working together in this Instagram image. All right, another Tennessee Athletics example. This is not necessarily the best example of space that I would have used. Personally, I might have done things a little bit differently. If I was designing this image, it's not bad at all. I might have just maybe moved some of the tweets around, but I get the idea. They wanted the focus of this to be Neyland Stadium because they're talking about the Neyland effect. And they did space things kind of neatly around this little graphic here. So you can see all this was very intentional. The message or the most important takeaway on this image is Neyland Stadium and that Neyland effect during a Tennessee game. Right. So to kind of wrap up our discussion on white space, or negative space. I want to really hone in on the importance of leveraging that in your designs. Again, this is an example with text and paragraphs, but our concepts are still going to be the same. It's really important to make sure that you kind of leverage space so that things are readable and legible. You don't want to necessarily cram things or smush things up against each other. This makes it kind of hard to tell where these paragraphs start and stop versus here on the right hand side of the screen, there's a really clear starting point and ending point for each paragraph and for the subheading and the heading here versus it's hard to tell on the left-hand side of the screen. So just kind of keep those space concepts in mind. The next design principle, we'll kind of move through these pretty quickly because I don't want to run out of time. I've got a couple more slides left. The concept of alignment, we talked about just a little already. There is both vertical and horizontal alignment when we are talking about designing graphic design or really any kind of design. So in our vertical alignment, this is a little self-explanatory. We've got top, middle, and bottom aligned. So you can see top, middle, bottom. And then in our horizontal alignment, we would have left, center, and right aligned. So if I want something to be dead center in the middle of the page, right in the middle, I would need it to be center aligned, but also middle aligned. So that way it would end up right about here. So that is just briefly touching on alignment. Like I said, that's pretty simple. I won't spend too much time touching on those concepts. Really quickly, I want to move into color theory and talk about color theory with you all. So you guys may have seen this image before or something similar. This is a color wheel. So you may also remember from learning about colors in school, we have what we call primary and secondary colors. So our primary colors are red, blue, and yellow. And our secondary colors are green, orange, and purple. Um, so this graphic is a really good example of showcasing primary colors as well as complementary colors. When we talk about complementary, a color is going to be complementary if it is directly across that color wheel from one another. So you can see yellow's complementary color would be purple, green's complementary color would be red, and vice versa. So anything directly across from the color wheel from one another are going to be complementary. Color theory is really important because color can have a really strong emotional impact on your audience. You may have heard folks talk about in the past that color makes them feel certain things. I know I've used lots of Tennessee Orange examples already. You can imagine when a Tennessee fan sees that UT Orange, that's going to be a really, really strong emotional response. Maybe you use red in designs for your food packaging because you've heard that red makes people hungry. There are lots of different emotional kind of connotations or associations with color, and different colors can mean different things for different people. So also really think about the color choices that you're using in your designs because that should be intentional, hopefully, whenever you are creating something for social media or for your digital marketing. So just another quick example of the emotional impact of color here. This is another Tennessee Athletics post. They were announcing Zach Bryan coming to play at Neyland Stadium with this particular post. So you can see they really leaned into that orange. They've got Neyland here in the background, and one of Zach Bryan's song titles is actually something in the orange. So there's a lot of kind of leaning into the emotional impact of color going on here, as well as maybe kind of a play on words. But how strong do you think that emotional response is for a Tennessee fan to see this, especially if they're a Zach Bryan fan? Pretty strong. Ball Sports knew what they were doing when they put this post out on social media. So props to whoever came up with this one. I think it went over really well online. Um, just as we've kind of talked about the emotional impact of color already, there's a lot of symbolism tied to color theory. So I mentioned that different colors mean different things for different people. Blue, you can see this graphic showcases there's a lot of different emotional responses or symbolism tied to the color blue. For some people, it may mean sadness. For others, blue can be sort of calming or peaceful. It may be associated with loyalty for different people. So that's just an example of symbolism at work in color theory. Another farm or maybe even agritourism sort of specific example, I wanted to talk about the idea of red barns and the symbolism of red for barns. So think about in all the farm stories that you may have heard growing up, or all the farm stories that you know, maybe the barn on your property is red. Um, Barns are always red in storybooks, right? Um, think about the kind of red barn and the imagery that you may associate with that. So that may remind folks of the farm they grew up on, or any of the kind of farm fairy tales or farm folklore that um, they've encountered in the past. There's a really strong emotional response tied into the image of a red barn. So that's just another really good example of color theory at work. And that will wrap up our discussion on color. The next design principle that I want to touch on is this concept of typography. So you may have heard typography before. You may, depending on if any of you work maybe regularly in Microsoft Word, or maybe you've done some stuff in Canva or with graphic design already, you know about fonts. So typically, when folks talk about a font casually, um, we're kind of referring to typography. So you may not know this. There are actually two different factors that go into typography, or the visual elements of what we would call a typeface. So a typeface is going to be your font family. So maybe you've seen serif fonts before, or sans serif fonts. Those are font families, and the specific family member or individual font that you choose um, would be would belong into that typeface. So this example over here on the slide is from Wix. They have a specific typeface or a font family known as Wix Made For, and the specific font that's highlighted in this graphic is called regular. So the way that that would read, if you were going to talk about this typeface and the font, it would read as Wix Made For regular. So the font family would come first, and then the individual font would come after when you're talking about that. Same thing if maybe if you were to pick the bold option, it would be Wix Made For bold. We won't spend a terrible amount of time talking about typography. I just wanted to show this slide to you guys because I think it's important to kind of know some common typefaces. You may recognize some of these. I mentioned serif versus sans serif fonts already. So when we talk about a serif font, um, serif fonts have these little tails attached to the end of the letters. And sans serifs Sans serif literally means without serif. So a sans serif font is missing the tail, and you can sort of see the difference here. And then we've got script fonts, so those would be any sort of maybe cursive or calligraphy type fonts. Then there's decorative and old style. Old style fonts would be like this Giraldi font here. Um, so any kind of classic or maybe even vintage, maybe when you think of um, fancy, like medieval type fonts, those would fall into old style as well. All right. So to kind of wrap up this discussion on why typography matters, um, just like space that we've talked about earlier, typography can really influence the readability and the legibility of a design. Also think about the brand identity that can be associated with a specific font. So if any of you are really big Coca-Cola fans, that Coca-Cola script or that cursive, that font is really associated with their brand identity. If you see that on a T-shirt or on a gift somewhere, you would know, oh, this is a Coca-Cola item. This goes together. Um, so fonts can start to become associated with your brand identity or with your business, and that's another reason why it might be important to think about the fonts that you use when you're posting things to social media. It's also important to be consistent. So if you use a different font, and not that there's necessarily a right or wrong, but if you maybe use a different font every single time, or 5 or 6 different fonts in one post, um, that can influence maybe the consistency in what you're posting or the designs that you're creating. So if your audience is coming to expect um, maybe a specific font combination or one specific font for your logo or in a design, that may be confusing for folks when they see a different post from you or a different design, because they're expecting one and then they see something else. So also think about that emotional response from your audience. Again, I talked about Coca-Cola as an example earlier. If people are really, really passionate about Coca-Cola, um, just like with even the UT font, and they see that big power T, that's going to elicit an emotional response from your audience. So typography can be really, really important for the things that you're designing. Real quickly, I'll also touch on readability versus legibility. So I've talked about these quite a bit already, um, but I've not given them sort of official definitions. So just to kind of touch on those differences, legibility refers to how easy it is for your brain to distinguish one letter from another. And readability is how easy it is for our brains to understand and absorb the message. So just because something is legible doesn't mean it's readable. Um, and maybe vice versa. That could go hand in hand, but um, kind of the key with this slide, the big takeaway, we want to shoot for things to be both legible and readable, because we want our audience or the folks that are looking at your designs to be able to literally read it, but also we want them to understand and absorb that message that you're trying to get across. So these last couple of slides here, I'm starting to wrap up. These last couple of slides, I have some examples of some design tools to know, um, starting from beginner to maybe intermediate level, just some helpful platforms or programs that can sort of help you use all these design principles that we've talked about to create social media images. Canva is a good one. You may not know this, but actually the slides that I've been presenting in today, I made those in Canva and I'm presenting from inside Canva right now. So Canva is sort of an all-in-one graphic design program. You you can make flyers, you can make social media images. It's still in my mind not a replacement for Photoshop or maybe more than light photo editing, but you can make very basic photo edits or touch-ups inside Canva. If you're using an image in a design, there's AI software built in now to assist. It's constantly upgrading, constantly getting better all the time. If you would have asked me a couple years ago, I would have preferred another program over Canva, but it's come such a long way just in the last few years. I use Canva almost all the time. And I have sort of a background in graphic design and kind of went through classes and coursework where I had to learn how to use some of those really difficult Adobe programs. And um, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to necessarily go through all the effort to learn how to use Photoshop or InDesign or Adobe Illustrator because you can rely on Canva now. So um, Canva will be a great friend to you if you have not sort of gotten familiar with that already. I encourage you to sort of look into that. They have, there's a free version, but there's also paid for versions that you can look into. And if any of you are maybe your teachers and you can qualify for that Canva for Educators um, profile, you can get access to a lot of those premium or pro features as an educator. But there is a like an authentication for that. So you have to be able to prove that you are an educator to qualify for that program. But you can make it just a completely no subscription at all, free account and do a lot of really great work in Canva. Maybe you've tried Canva before and it wasn't for you, and you're maybe looking for an alternative. There is another really nice beginner-friendly design tool out there, actually Adobe Express. So I would see Adobe Express sort of as a direct Canva alternative. There is a mobile app. There's an app for Canva as well, but there is an iPhone and Android application. Um, Adobe Express is moving towards enhancing more AI features. I would say that probably Canva still leans on AI just a little bit more than maybe Adobe Express does. I would consider this your user-friendly introduction to Adobe Creative Cloud and the Adobe Creative Suite. So maybe you've heard of Photoshop or InDesign, some of those other programs I've mentioned already. And you're interested in exploring that space, but maybe you don't have the time to jump straight into Illustrator or Photoshop. Adobe Express is a really user-friendly way to move into that Adobe Creative Cloud platform. The next couple of slides will touch on sort of our intermediate design tools to know. So Photoshop is a big one. Photoshop is part of the Adobe Creative Suite. It is strictly a photo editing software. There is a smartphone app that's called PS Express. It's got limited capability. You do have to have a computer or an iPad to do much more in Photoshop um, than on the phone. Um, like I mentioned earlier, some of these Adobe Creative Cloud programs can be really time intensive to learn. I won't necessarily say it's going to be hard for everybody. I know for me going through college and taking some of these design courses, if you've never used it before, it's going to be challenging because there are a lot of buttons, a lot of um, tools that you have to learn. Okay, what does this button do? Or how do I do this? Or so it can be it's not impossible at all, but I would consider it a little bit more of the intermediate to maybe even advanced for some folks. So um, I would encourage you to look into it if it's something that you're interested in, but there are much easier and free design tools out there for you, so you don't necessarily have to rush out to purchase some of these programs. This next one that we'll look at briefly is Adobe Illustrator. So kind of same thing with Photoshop in mind. Illustrator is another one of those design tools that takes a lot of time to learn. It is part of the Adobe Creative Suite also. This one has to run on a computer. There is an iPad version of Adobe Illustrator. It has limited capability compared to what you can do on the computer. Again, I would consider Adobe Illustrator intermediate to advanced. So you've really got to learn what all those tools and buttons do. It can be frustrating to learn. When I was in college, kind of learning how to use Illustrator, I made a cartoon of actually my husband's truck. And it looks like it was sort of drawn with maybe an Apple Pencil, but everything was done with the mouse, and you just clicked and dragged different things, and you made the shapes with the mouse and the keyboard, and it can be definitely frustrating, and maybe too time consuming if you need a quick design fix. This is where I would definitely recommend Canva or Adobe Express in place of Illustrator if you need something done quickly. Same thing with Photoshop. It's not to say it's impossible. It's just we talked a lot about how we're all short on time, and we're short on attention. So this may not work out for you if you need something sort of quickly. And Adobe InDesign is the last design tool that we'll touch on. InDesign is also part of the Adobe Creative Suite. It runs on a computer. To my knowledge, there is no smartphone or iPad application for Adobe InDesign. You have to use a computer to run this program. Adobe InDesign is used to create magazine, newsletter layouts. Maybe you are trying to make one page or two page kind of booklets. You can make pamphlets, things of all sizes. But the difference between Adobe InDesign and maybe Canva or Adobe Express, you have to start from scratch. So there are templates available. I think a lot of them have to be purchased from Adobe, but you can purchase templates. Um, but this is another one, requires a lot of familiarization with the tools and the features. So if you need a quick fix for a newsletter or a flyer, I would definitely recommend Canva or Adobe Express in place of learning InDesign, especially if you're just going to be doing this for maybe your farm business. You're not going to run out tomorrow and say, oh, I'm going to do this for maybe my full-time job. There are much more user-friendly, time-saving tools available. But I felt like these big three, Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, were design tools that you guys needed to kind of know outside of that beginner space. So that will bring us to the end of our slides. We've still got time for questions. If anybody has any, I know I threw a lot of information at you guys relatively quickly, and some things I kind of glossed over and spent a little less time on than others. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat or ask now. And if you don't have any, I will go ahead and share. This is my contact information if anybody needs it. I know if you guys are signed up for Daring to Learn already, you have this information. But this has got CPA's website, our Facebook page, our Instagram, and then of course our YouTube channel information is all on this slide. And lastly, our attendance and evaluation form. So this is that QR code I talked about at the very beginning of this session. Feel free to scan this or use that link and fill out so that I can get attendance for you guys for today. And feel free, if you don't have any questions, feel free to hop off And this is all I had for you guys today. We will be back in April. Our next session in April will be me again. I'll be talking about visual branding and being consistent in your visual branding. So thank you guys. And if there are no questions, feel free to, once you get your evaluation form or attendance link, feel free to hop off and I'll see you guys next month.